Before the pyramids, before the pharaohs, there was Ta-Seti, a Nubian civilization whose kings wore crowns that would later become Egypt's most sacred symbol, and whose story challenges the narrative about where African civilization truly began. The history books tell us that ancient Egypt was the beginning, the first great African civilization, the birthplace of pharaohs, pyramids, and hieroglyphs. We've been taught to see Egypt as the starting point, and everything else as coming after. But there's a problem with that story, and it's buried under Lake Nasser in southern Egypt and northern Sudan. In the 1960s, archaeologists racing against time, before a massive dam flooded the region forever, uncovered something that shouldn't have existed: royal tombs, artifacts decorated with pharaonic symbols, and an incense burner showing a king wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt. The same crown we associate with Egypt's earliest rulers. Except these weren't Egyptian tombs. They were Nubian, and they were older than Egypt's first dynasty. The place was called Ta-Seti. And before you assume this is some fringe theory or wishful thinking, let me stop you right there. This comes from the University of Chicago Oriental Institute. It was published in academic journals, and it sparked a debate that's still shaking the foundations of how we understand African history. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from and how the weather is treating you today. I want to know who's on this journey with me. So here's what we've been taught. Ancient Egypt emerged around 3100 BCE when a king named Narmer unified Upper and Lower Egypt. He became the first pharaoh, wore the combined crowns, and started the first dynasty. That's where civilization in the Nile Valley began. But the archaeological record tells a different story. In this video, I'm taking you to Ta-Seti, a name that means land of the bow. I'm going to show you the archaeological evidence that suggests Black Nubian civilization didn't just exist alongside early Egypt. It may have come first. I'll walk you through the discoveries at Qustul, the controversy that erupted when scholars tried to rewrite history, and why some of this evidence is now lost forever underwater. Every fact here is verified, documented, and sourced from Wikipedia and academic research. Let's start with the name itself. Ta-Seti. In ancient Egyptian, it literally translates to land of the bow. The Egyptians gave this name to the southernmost region of their empire, the area bordering Nubia, because the people there were legendary archers. Nubian bowmen were so skilled that Egypt eventually recruited them into their own armies. The bow became their symbol, their identity. But Ta-Seti wasn't just an Egyptian province. The term also referred to the broader Nubian region itself, the land stretching from Aswan in southern Egypt down through what is now northern Sudan. This was a place where Egyptian and Nubian cultures blended, traded, intermarried, and influenced each other for thousands of years. The main city of Ta-Seti as an Egyptian administrative division was Abu, which we know today as Elephantine, near modern Aswan. But the deeper history, the pre-Egyptian history, that's what we're really here to talk about. Now, before I go further, what topic about ancient African civilizations baffles you the most? Drop it in the comments below, and I'll research it and make a video just for you. In 1962, archaeologist Keith C. Seal led a University of Chicago expedition to Nubia. They knew time was running out. Egypt was building the Aswan High Dam, and when it was completed, Lake Nasser would flood hundreds of archaeological sites permanently. It was now or never. The team excavated at a site called Qustul, located in what was then Lower Nubia. What they found changed everything, or at least it should have. They uncovered royal tombs dating to around 3800 BCE. That's 700 years before Egypt's supposed unification. Inside these tombs were artifacts that looked distinctly pharaonic. Royal insignia, symbols of power, and most dramatically, the Qustul incense burner. This artifact shows an image of a Nubian king. He's wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt, the tall, elongated crown that would become one of the most recognizable symbols of Egyptian pharaohs. He's seated on a boat. There's a falcon guard, which would later be associated with Horus, the divine protector of pharaohs. And there's a symbol that appears to represent a palace or royal estate. Here's the question that shook the academic world. If Nubians in Ta-Seti were using pharaonic symbols before the first dynasty of Egypt, where did those symbols come from? Archaeologist Bruce Williams published his analysis in 1986. His argument was clear and controversial. Nubian polities, including Ta-Seti, developed centralized leadership before Egypt. The royal symbolism we associate with Egyptian pharaohs, the crowns, the falcon guard, the concept of divine kingship, may have originated in Nubia, not Egypt. Early Egyptian rulers might have adopted Nubian traditions, not the other way around. This challenges the traditional narrative that treats Egypt and Nubia as completely separate, with Egypt always in the lead. Like, comment, and subscribe if this story is opening your eyes to something you've never heard before. Your subscription means the world to me. This channel is still growing, and every single one of you helps keep these hidden African histories alive. Now, let me be completely transparent with you, because your trust matters to me. Williams' theory has been challenged. More recent discoveries at Abydos in Upper Egypt have shown that Egyptian monarchy developed earlier than initially thought, and some scholars now argue that the Qustul rulers probably adopted or emulated the symbols of Egyptian pharaohs, not the other way around. But here's the problem with settling this debate. The archaeological cemeteries at Qustul are no longer available for excavation. They're underwater. Lake Nasser flooded them in the 1960s. The evidence is gone. We can't go back and dig deeper. We can't answer the questions that remain. Historian Christopher Ehret re-examined Williams' findings in 2023. He argued that Williams' work was challenged at the time not because of bad archaeology, but because of long-held assumptions of ancient Egypt as somehow in but not of Africa. In other words, the idea that black Africans from Nubia could have influenced or even preceded Egyptian civilization was too uncomfortable for some scholars to accept. Ehret's research suggests that the Qustul state was more influential than Williams initially claimed. He writes that the Qustul elite and their Egyptian counterparts participated together in creating the emerging culture and paraphernalia of pharaonic culture, not one influencing the other, but both contributing to something new. So what do we know for certain? By around 3500 BCE, a culture called the A group arose in Nubia. These were people living side by side with the Nakoda culture of Upper Egypt. They traded with each other: gold, copper tools, pottery, stone vessels. The A group had strong rulers. Their tombs show wealth, organization, and the symbols of authority. Around 3100 BCE, the A group culture was destroyed by pharaohs of Egypt's first dynasty. Northern Nubia was not heavily inhabited for centuries afterward, partly because of Egyptian military action. Ta-Seti, as a Nubian region, never disappeared. It became the first nome, the first administrative division of Upper Egypt. A borderland, a place of cultural exchange, a region where Egyptian and Nubian traditions blended so thoroughly that scholars still argue about where one ends and the other begins. What part of Ta-Seti's story strikes you most? The fact that the evidence is underwater? The challenge to traditional narratives? The possibility that royal symbols came from Nubia first? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear what you're thinking. Here's what makes this story so important. For too long, African history has been told through a European lens. Egypt was acceptable to European scholars because they could mentally separate it from Black Africa. But Nubia, Sudan, Ta-Seti, that was undeniably Black African. And the idea that this region might have influenced or even preceded Egypt threatened the entire framework of how African history was understood. The Qustul discoveries challenged that framework. They suggested that centralized African civilization, complete with divine kingship, monumental architecture, and sophisticated culture, might have emerged in multiple places along the Nile simultaneously, or that it started in Nubia and spread north. Either possibility rewrites the story we've been told. But because the sites are now underwater, because the full excavation was never completed, because academic resistance was so strong, Ta-Seti remains a mystery wrapped in controversy. The Nubians were not Egypt's primitive southern neighbors. They were skilled archers. They were miners who introduced gold to Egypt. They were traders who controlled routes between North Africa and the interior of the continent. They were builders, artists, and eventually conquerors. Nubian pharaohs would rule Egypt itself during the 25th dynasty, around 747 to 656 BCE. The land of the bow deserves its place in history not as Egypt's shadow, but as a civilization in its own right, one that may have been there first, one whose kings wore crowns that became symbols of pharaonic power, one whose story challenges us to see African history as more complex, more interconnected, and more ancient than conventional narratives suggest. If this video has made you see ancient Africa differently, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear this story. Our ancestors built civilizations that deserve to be remembered. Your support keeps these stories alive. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that challenges conventional narratives. Thank you for taking this journey with me to Ta-Seti, to the southern border where Nubia and Egypt met, to the underwater sites that still hold secrets we may never fully uncover. The land of the bow reminds us that African history didn't begin where we've been told it began. It began wherever Black African people gathered, organized, built, and created, whether that was in Egypt, Nubia, or anywhere else on this magnificent continent. Until next time, remember that the stories they didn't teach you in school are often the ones that matter most.